Welcome to Changeling Gaming! Today we're going to be talking about... A cooperative board game is any board game that involves the players at the table working as a team in order to collectively win or lose the game being played. Some notable examples of cooperative board games are Pandemic, the Forbidden series, The Captain is Dead, Mysterium, though there are many more. There are many differences between these games, but there are a good number of similarities between them. They all feature game loss conditions, game victory conditions, and all kinds of resources and abilities to manage. Note that some versions of cooperative games work differently. Mysterium, for instance, is asymmetrical and leans hard into a collective time crunch and challenging communication rather than throwing threats at the team that must be dealt with like our other example games. One of the most important aspects of any cooperative board game is being aware of under what conditions the game will be lost, of which there are often more than one, and taking steps to prevent those loss conditions. Some are less important to note than others, which depends on the nature of the loss condition itself. Knowing what kind of loss condition is being dealt with informs how the team needs to approach preventing it, and the types of urgency it creates. Many loss conditions tend to increase at an exponential rate if not dealt with regularly. These conditions will pile onto themselves and become a much larger hassle the longer they're left alone. It is important to recognize fail conditions that fall into this bucket because they are often the most dangerous in terms of a quick game end, which means that steps must frequently be taken to prevent them from getting out of hand. A good number of other loss conditions will not compound, but rather exist as a steady danger, slowly but consistently building up towards their final loss condition. These are the kinds of loss conditions that are best mitigated by allowing them to build up a bit before utilizing a resource or power to remove a bunch of the dangers, which gives the team time to focus elsewhere. Finally, some of these loss conditions are merely a time limit, lasting until a particular deck of cards is complete, but where players must draw cards every round. No mitigation is possible in this instance, but it is important to note because this loss condition means it is key to keep moving forwards towards the goals, or else the team will very likely be caught at the end of the game without enough actions to win, often being short by just a few key steps. Heartbreaking. A great example of all three of these loss conditions is Pandemic. Within the game, the most dangerous loss condition generally is epidemics, which can trigger cascading epidemics when they are too close together. Removing the third cube from these cities, especially those adjacent to each other, is vital to preventing this compounding danger. A steady danger, meanwhile, is the risk of running out of cubes of a particular color to place, which can be exacerbated by epidemics, but is usually a steady stream of a cube or two per turn at its worst. Certain characters, cards, and the cure allowing multiple cubes to be removed for one action are all key means to remove more cubes than are being placed on average in a given turn. The game also ends though if the player deck is ever empty, and with players being forced to draw 2 cards every turn, that sets a very real clock on the team playing to keep moving forwards towards the objective. I know I just spent a bunch of time talking about how important it is to keep the loss conditions in mind while playing the game, but not losing isn't the same thing as winning, especially if the game has a finite clock. Most cooperative games are balanced so that as time goes on, it will be less and less possible to properly manage everything that is falling apart, leaving victory as the only actual escape from the problems. No matter how effective a team is at keeping the loss conditions in check, if actions aren't being spent towards the fulfillment of the objectives, then the game cannot be won. So it is important for at least one, if not 2 or more members of the team to regularly take steps towards the victory conditions of the game. This balance between mitigating the loss conditions and achieving the victory conditions is the tightrope every team must walk together to effectively succeed in a cooperative game. As an example, let's take a look at the game Forbidden Island. In this game, the island is sinking, and tiles will be flipped and flooded before being removed if they sink. That said, it is basically impossible to shore up every flooded tile in a single player's turn, meaning slowly they are going to sink. The game therefore becomes about slowing that loss progression and keeping in mind which tiles must be kept from sinking to keep victory a viable option for the team. At least one of each temple and Fool's Landing must all be kept afloat, at least until the treasures are secure and a path to the exit available. Jumping on every opportunity to keep these victory conditions viable and around is the key here to keeping the game going and a win on the horizon. Most games provide some key resources to help deal with the situations at hand. Special bonus cards, limited use actions, or powerful ways to spend the key resources needed to win. Choosing when and where to leverage these resources is often the key to both preventing loss conditions from overrunning the board and achieving the elusive victory conditions. Resources take all kinds of different forms, though one of the most common are cards of different colors, or elements, or something similar that must be collected in sets in order to progress the victory conditions. Sometimes these resources can also be used to extend movement, or add a powerful station the players can use to bolster their efforts at combating the loss conditions or find the win conditions. There are also many event cards, limited use items, or special powers that also exist within cooperative games. Most often, these are designed to help combat a specific threat, and are best used when they can affect the most of that danger possible. Clearing all the accumulated danger in a single location, handing life back to a character nearing their end, or instantly solving a single urgent problem. Often, these cards can also be used to move out of a dangerous location. There is another kind of resource management that is the core resource every player has in a cooperative game: their actions. Moving efficiently and doing as much as possible in one location or part of the map before moving to the next tends to be a very helpful way to maximize the use of this particularly precious resource. Especially since moving between locations uses up those vital actions that could have been used instead to solve problems or gather resources at the current location. In The Captain is Dead, maximizing the use of a location is absolutely essential. Heading to the computer bank and filling up on a hand of cards tends to be a better use of actions than popping in, grabbing one card, and then heading to another location to fix a single system by spending that card. Occasionally, this might be the right course of action, but it expends 2 movement actions currently and a third to return to get more cards in future turns. A better option would be to grab the card from another player and head straight to the location with the problem that needs solving. It only saves 1 action this turn, but over the course of many turns and many more efficient actions, this approach allows the team to better use those additional actions to solve other problems on the ship, with either more resources in their hand of cards, or more actions to deal with action-based problems like aliens boarding the vessel. In most cooperative games, each player will receive a unique character with their own abilities or superpower. Being able to effectively leverage these abilities is often the second key alongside resource management in stemming the tide of loss conditions and climbing to those difficult victory conditions. This individualization is often seen as particular characters having unique power-ups in the right situations. However, I would suggest that in most cases, these abilities should alter the core play pattern of these characters. Some characters' powers are much better at fighting off the loss conditions, meaning they are best used in this capacity, and while they can contribute to winning, these characters should be more focused on dealing with the dangers that lurk. Some characters have abilities that help solve the win conditions of the game, meaning they should focus their efforts in that direction, and only contribute to fighting the loss conditions when they are in the right location at the right time, or if the game gets desperate. Finally, some characters are best used in supporting the other characters and helping them accomplish their tasks. Their abilities are usually focused on interacting with other players and either setting the board up for success or providing resources to other players that they can use. Looking back at Pandemic, the quarantine specialist and medic are clearly focused on fighting the diseases, fighting off the infections and keeping the spread to a minimum. Meanwhile, the scientist and researcher are dedicated to finding the cures, either themselves or by giving their cards to the other players and more easily gathering the needed resources. The dispatcher and operations expert are examples of support, either using their actions to move other players, effectively giving them additional actions to get to where they need to be, or by building a network of research stations that provide easy transport across the world and additional sites for the vital cure research to be completed at around the world. Sometimes, however, which category a character falls into might be a bit harder to identify. This usually occurs in games where there are multiple different skills that might be needed to solve different problems, in which case the skills needed to solve each problem dictate which character is best at it. Take The Captain is Dead Again. Each character has their own ability, number of actions, and hand size, but most importantly are the skill discounts that they have on their character card. When these are connected to the various problems across the ship, it can become clear which skills are associated with which tasks. Tactical skills are needed for most of the available weaponry and thus fighting off the dangers of the ship. Engineering skills, meanwhile, are vital for repairing the engines, which need to be fixed in order for the ship to warp out and win the game. Research is sometimes needed to solve particular problem cards, but is also largely useful to upgrade the ship and thus support the ability of the crew to tackle their problems. While command can prevent alert cards from taking place, but also are used to gather cards from the captain's plans deck, which are full of powerful resources that can be used to support any individual set of actions. With everything before this in mind, there is one element that will nonetheless ruin a cooperative game: if it becomes a solo game with multiple players and one actual decision maker, known in this situation as the quarterback. This actually largely ties into my last Be a Better Gamer video around what ruins board game tables, because it is focused on a player's toxic behavior at a board gaming table and the challenges it poses to even play cooperative games in the first place. Understandably, if a group of players sit down together to play a cooperative board game together, their goal collectively is to win. The challenge here, though, is if a single player takes it into their head that victory matters at any cost, and that they alone know the single best line of action to take for any individual player's turn. What this becomes is that player dictating what every other player must do on their turns to optimize gameplay as they have decided. Some players may like it, but most do not. After all, most people engage in board games because it gives them some manner of agency in life, and fun to be had with friends. Now, sometimes having agency means that players aren't all going to recognize which steps are optimal and play the game perfectly. And that's okay. Ultimately, I would argue that it is better for each player to have a chance to make their own choices, and if they fail, then hopefully they can learn from that experience and improve for the next time the game hits the table. Providing advice to players who aren't sure what to do is fine, but try out our rule of thumb. Only give advice to a player if they ask for it. If they don't ask, then give them the space to make their own decisions. And make peace with the fact that cooperative games will often be lost, because they are quite the challenge. If they weren't, players wouldn't come back to them as often as they do. So, in conclusion, know what will cause you to lose the game, but also what is needed to win the game, and tackle both problems simultaneously. It's a tough tightrope to walk. Leverage your collective resources and skills to accomplish those goals. Recognize what your character's specialty is and lean into it. Whether that's tackling the loss conditions, fighting for the victory conditions, or supporting everyone else's efforts, which might not feel as impactful, but know that their successes will be thanks to your support. And of course, let everyone play the game together, and don't be so stressed about winning that it becomes a solo game with human NPCs. You are not trying to be better than everyone else, you win together, in the game and in real life. If you want to hear our thoughts on specific board games, you can find all our board game reviews on our Patreon, link in the description. Thank you for watching, and remember, keep changing, keep gaming. Have fun.